on the morning show. All right. I think, no, we okay. I think we are live. Welcome everybody. This is our final webinar from our recent New Dimensions lab that we ran recently near Johannesburg. This lab was special because with the support of the Mozilla Foundation, we introduced a new element exploring responsible and trustworthy AI from an African perspective and from the perspective of artists and the needs of artists specifically. We're really interested in Electric South at exploring what the current field of AI means for us, as artist practitioners across many different fields in Africa, what we need to be thinking about. And then on the documentary side, which is why I was so excited to have Francesca join us. Also, like from a documentary perspective and from the ethics around nonfiction, what this means for us as storytellers. So that's why I'm really glad that Francesca, who I know is incredibly busy, was able to join us for this hour to talk us through some of these issues and maybe have a specific focus around synthetic media, which I know you've been exploring. So welcome, Francesca. It's lovely to have you with us.
I'm very pleased to be here.
I was actually trying to remember the first time I met you, and I think it was on the steps of the convention center at South by Southwest many years ago. I don't know if you remember that.
I do remember, yeah. Like over 10 years ago.
Over 10 years ago. Yeah,
Yeah.
you were just kicking things off at the Guardian with XR. So we go way back. And I thought just to start this conversation, because I think in this field, because there's so many disciplines that kind of overlap in the XR space, and I think because a lot of African artists are really interested in how people make work or think about work in the space, because I guess the infrastructure here is not quite as developed, and because we're also trying to sort of build things as we want them to be. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about your background, how you came to do all of this, the kinds of things that brought you here.
Yeah, sure. I think one of the nice things about the XR space is how people come from really different backgrounds and perspectives, and it means that it's one of the nice kind of having this mishmash of people from different places mean that you end up with really unexpected outputs, and really wonderful collaboration. So I'm really pleased that everyone doesn't come at things through like the same process. I originally started in classical music. That's what I trained in, and then I went into radio. So I've got a really kind of solid background in sound, in kind of sound art, radio documentary, music, and I worked originally kind of trained at the BBC in engineering, sound engineering, before going to work into production. And I was always really interested in kind of experimental feature making. So even though I was making documentaries, I was always kind of interested in how you can push formats and not make them sound like really kind of boring BBC standard format documentaries. And maybe that's also showing a kind of interest in innovation and experimentation, that even when there wasn't new technologies to be thinking about, I was still thinking, how can we reinvent storytelling in audio in a different way? So I then started up my own company making audio augmented reality apps. So I was really interested when smartphones came out, how we could rethink about audio in space by using the very first iPhones that were out. And then from there, I thought, oh, there's this whole world of kind of experimenting in new media that I hadn't been part of, and was thinking, oh, wow, there's web documentaries, and there's the kind of the broadcasters at the time were thinking about what you can do that's interesting if you press the red or blue button, on the BBC. Had these kind of very early on kind of interactive systems where you could do limited amount of things to interact with TV programs. And I'd moved from the BBC to the Guardian when they were setting up podcasting. And again, I think that my interest was in experimenting and like, what can what could radio programming look like if it was unleashed from these horrible broadcast timelines, from these horrible formats that were prescribed on you from these commissioning systems? So even though The Guardian was a 200-year-old newspaper, it didn't have all of these structures and kind of pre-thinking around what radio was. So I'd been there for a good kind of 6 years, I think, before I went into so-called interactives or XR. And they kind of gave me a bit of a space to be experimenting, because I had been building these audio augmented reality apps, and they kind of saw that I was interested in working with technologists and different kinds of forms, non-linear forms of storytelling. And I was really lucky that they kind of gave me, I mean, to be honest, it was just one other person and a tiny budget per year. But they did give me quite a lot of freedom. And then by kind of making partnerships with people across The Guardian, I managed to pull people in with different skills. And I guess, again, going back to my kind of, it's really great to work with people from different spaces. I think being open-minded about what these people could bring without really prescribing, oh, well, you have to be a you have to be a filmmaker to come and work on the interactive team. Sometimes it would end up being a writer or someone in data, or just all kinds of different backgrounds who just kind of stumbled into our little team and wanted to collaborate. So it meant that we came up with all kinds of different outputs. But yeah, for a while it was kind of snowfall-esque, kind of scrolly interactive-y stuff. And then we had a whole load of kind of 360 panorama-y kind of stuff we were doing. And then we made, actually supported by you, Ingrid, when we were just thinking about virtual reality. It was this kind of new, here's virtual reality. We thought, well, what can we do for this at The Guardian? And we've been kind of tossing around this idea in the larger newsroom around solitary confinement. And so Tribeca New Media Fund gave us some money to build a piece around solitary confinement in US prisons. And we were very lucky. We were given a whole year to do that. But we managed to create a piece that in the end, we were able to build a partnership with Google to build out a virtual reality studio at The Guardian for 2 years. And that kind of wasn't the plan. But again, I think by kind of following our noses and trying to make good pieces along the way, it opened up other possibilities. And then by 2018, we were beginning to experiment in voice technologies with Google as well, thinking about what kind of voice assistants could mean for news. And then I went off and did a fellowship at Harvard University for journalists. And as you know, I'm not a trained journalist, but by then they kind of saw me as a journalist. And so I was able to spend a year there really kind of thinking about, okay, in this interactive new media space, kind of where can I really be thriving and be the most useful? Because newsrooms, although they'd given a lot of support, in the end of the day, didn't really care too much about experimental. And so I moved from there to MIT, made a piece there around deepfakes and synthetic media, and then have eventually ended up moving to UAL, the University of Arts in London, where I am now. And I'm heading up a program around storytelling and social change. So this isn't specifically XR or new media, but it's really looking at storytelling in all of its forms and its correlation to social impact and kind of purposeful storytelling, and really thinking about how we know whether what we're doing actually is working. Like when we make these pieces that say they're about climate change, or they're about, is it actually doing what we want it to do? And are we going about creating those pieces in the most effective ways? Or are we using kind of old storylines and techniques that aren't necessarily the most kind of persuasive or impactful? So that's what we're really digging into at the moment in the Institute, is how we can be, I guess, slightly more strategic and know more accurately whether we're kind of doing what we want to do through the work.
Wow, that's yeah, I mean, I have to say that's something that I'm really interested in. It's a question, I think it's come up a lot in my career as well, not just now with Electric South, but previously at Tribeca. I think we were not so great at, I think we were really good at funding interesting projects and working with great people. I don't think we were so great on the like, what is this piece actually doing?
Mm,
Because I think by that point everyone was tired and we were out of funds. And
yeah,
so it was like, okay, next project. And
yeah,
I do think it's something that now, especially with the focus on climate and these sort of like big existential issues, to actually know what the storytelling is doing, or not doing, I guess,
yeah.
is really really vital. So I can't wait to hear what comes out of the Storytelling Institute. Just before we move on, because I started with such haste, I completely forgot to introduce myself, and Cyriletto. So I am Ingrid Kopp, from Electric South, and I also wanted to mention that I live in a very rural area with satellite internet. So if my screen is pixelated, or there's a delay, that's why. So please bear with me. And my colleague here at Cyriletto is going to be mostly silent, but she's going to be sharing her screen just to show some things as Fran talks about them. So that's who we are, just in case you're wondering why there's the two of us here. So yeah, sorry to leap into it so quickly. So yeah, so I thought maybe we could dig a little bit further into the in event of moon disaster project you mentioned, because I wanted to use this time to talk a little bit about issues around synthetic media and journalism. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about what that project is about and why you decided to make it.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, maybe while I'm talking, Cyriletto, I wonder whether you could bring it up, and wonder if we could put it on mute and just have it playing in the background so that I can just kind of have some kind of visual references as we're going through. So have you got the and in fact, I wonder if you could press on the top left, which will take us to the homepage of this site. Great, thank you. So yeah, this was a project that while I was at the Harvard course, the journalism course, we were talking a lot about deep fakes. Really, they'd just come into public consciousness. And so I guess in the world of journalism, we were really worried about mis and disinformation. And it was also the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. And we knew about this speech that had been written for Nixon if the moon landing hadn't been successful and if the astronauts hadn't been able to make it back. And we thought that bringing that speech to life would be a really good example of a deep fake, and potentially show people how they could be deceived and manipulated through such kind of technique, but we'd be doing it in a way that was not on the nose, using a topic that everybody loves, space. The 1969 moon landing is something that still resonates really strongly. And so that's what we decided to do. And I moved from Harvard to MIT, where I was able to work on this for most of the year, the next year, in collaboration with another artist, Halsey Burgund, who we co-directed this piece together. And maybe if you could just tap on the next, we can just kind of walk through a little bit of it. We decided really to be quite upfront about what the project was, because I guess one of the things that was in our mind as we created it was, well, how do we not just create another bit of misinformation? And how explicit do we need to be? And I think this is something within new technologies and new media is permanently a kind of question for how kind of, on one hand, you want to be very poetic with what you're making, but when media is really, really new, and when it's might be quite kind of clear to you that you've used something like GPT or DALI or something like that, but it might not be to your audiences, and they might not even know what that means. So we spent quite a lot of time even debating this word deep fake, like might our audiences not even know what that was? So if you want to click through to, it doesn't really matter which you click on. We then kind of took people to a film, which, and if you, I think, can you put this on silent so we can just have it on in the background? Maybe it is silent because I can't hear anything. So maybe
It should be silent. Can you hear
great.
it?
No, this is perfect. That's great. So yeah, the piece is built almost entirely out of archive, and what we used was some broadcast material. We used quite a lot of NASA footage, and the piece basically, we edited a new version of what happened. So if you scroll forward maybe about, I don't know, a minute maybe or so, maybe to about 2 minutes in. So yeah, all of this is kind of NASA footage that was open to the public to use. Yeah, a little bit further. And then what we essentially did was using what has sometimes been used in the kind of academic misinformation world as cheap fakes. We just using Premiere, we just crashed these astronauts onto the moon. Yeah, there's a sequence that comes up kind of quite soon. Yeah, maybe another 20 seconds or so forward. And we reverse footage, we speed it up, we take the most bits of in fact, finding audio of them where these astronauts sounded even vaguely concerned was really, really hard, because astronauts are like built to be these like machine-like calm people, and to find any kind of concern in their voices was a real challenge. Anyway, we went through meticulously to find any bits of urgency in any of the archive tape. We then, we did like all this cross-cutting. We reversed the Apollo. Actually, that original bit of footage is the Eagle coming up, but here we have it kind of crashing onto the moon surface, and then we kind of cut to black. And then we have this sequence where we have Richard Nixon coming onto the TV and presenting this speech that he never actually gave. And maybe while we watch this, I'll tell you how we made it. So we took this speech that was written by Bill Safire, who was Nixon's speechwriter at the time. And we worked with two companies, a company called Canny AI that did the visual part of manipulating the image of Richard Nixon. And then we worked with another company called Respeecher, who work in synthetic audio. And we built both a voice model, and we also manipulated the area around Nixon's mouth to make it look like he was reading the speech. So the original video of this is actually Nixon's resignation speech. So everything you can see on the screen is real. The hand movements, all of the setting in the White House, his head movements, and it's just the area around the mouth that has been manipulated using AI. And the way that we puppeted this bit of video is we had an actor in a studio reading this speech, and what it did was it used the movement from the actor, and then using AI got the area around the lips of Nixon to manipulate that area. Then we built this, then we gave, after building the voice model with Respeecher, which we did by giving hundreds and hundreds of clips of our actor speaking the same sentences as Richard Nixon. So we cut up loads of speeches, and mainly of Nixon talking about Vietnam. And what you do is you train a voice model by giving equal sets of data. So the actor saying it and Nixon saying it, the model learns the difference between the two, so the Nixon voice and the actor's voice. And then once you've built that model, the actor can say anything they want, and it will then can come out in Nixon's voice. So then what we did, once the voice model was built, we could have our actor reading the text of this speech, and then we got a audio file back. And then what we did was quite painstakingly manipulated the video to make sure it was absolutely in sync, because these essentially had been two completely different production processes. So there was a lot of fiddling around in Premiere trying to make them go together. Now, what happens at the end of this video is it then goes to black, and then it asks a few questions. And so this is something we played around a lot with trying to, like, how then do you give the message? Like, okay, so they get to the end, they might be like, oh, wow, okay, that was a bit weird. That definitely didn't happen. But then if you want to click on one of the answers there, real, yes, well, as you know from what I just said, it was real. And then you go to the next one. And so this was us trying to essentially reveal what happened. And again, we thought really carefully about the ethics of this piece. So it wasn't enough for us just to kind of scare people into deep fakes or to kind of scare people through this video. We really thought, how do we say what's happened and also kind of empower people afterwards with what to do. So yeah, you can go through to the next. Was Nixon's face real? Let's see. Well, he was a deep fake, so as we know. And then if you go to the next, the voice. Yes, it was deep fake too. And then you go to the next, and then we end up, oh my gosh, okay, well, I also told you the answer to this one as well. So the space footage was all real, although we did manipulate that. And then we built this whole hub. So if you then click in the middle, we decided that we wanted to have a kind of a hub of resources. Again, we were really trying to think around the ethics of what we were doing and how to empower people, not just leave them terrified at the end. So we've got, you can just scroll through these. The behind the scenes was a kind of interactive scrollery thing, which really unpicks how we made this. We were working with a journalist as well, and the Deepfakes 101 really unpicks what deepfakes are, how the algorithms work, and the kind of history around that. We then did a kind of synthetic media for good, why this can be used for creativity or for health, all the kind of, there are lots of reasons why synthetic media can be helpful. Deep fake dystopia, I can't remember what that article was. I think that's another written article. And then we also partnered with Scientific American, and they built a half-hour documentary, partly out of a lot of the research that we did at the beginning. So I would say that before even starting a project like this, and maybe it's having this background in journalism, but even though it was clear what the story was going to be and what the production process was going to be, I spent a lot of the first couple of months just talking to people who work in this industry. So, you know, I phoned up people who are working in behavioral science and deep fakes, you know, and saying, okay, what are the best ways that we could be protecting people through deep fakes, through interventions, and what kind of messaging works? And then, you know, people in the Shorenstein Center who were thinking about legislation and what are the changes to the legal system that needs to be done to protect people. And even though it doesn't necessarily change the storyline, a lot of the nuance of that is built into this piece, in whether it's the way in or the way out, and thinking about the framing of it. We thought a lot about whether we needed to watermark the piece, and we talked with Witness about kind of what good practices were around labeling and kind of messaging. And actually, if you wouldn't mind getting up another web page, which if you just Google and search for In Event of Moon Disaster and YouTube, I think it's quite worth seeing what the different messaging that we put around the YouTube version, because a lot of what we think about as well is context. So what we were just showing was that was our interactive website that we built and had kind of control about where people come in. We don't necessarily have control of where they come out, because obviously someone can leave a website at any time, but there's a lot more that we could control in terms of what the framing of that piece was. In something like YouTube, you don't necessarily know where someone's come from or what they're looking for. And so we had to do very different framing for the YouTube piece. Did you manage to find I think it's like an 8 or 9 minute piece. Let me just, actually, that's a good idea. Let me just find the link for you. So this is it here. And if you bring that up and maybe skip the first, well, maybe we'll just watch the first sequence actually. So this bit is quite important. What you're about to see is not real.
Armstrong and Aldrin are scheduled to set foot on the moon.
That felt like a pitch change rather than an acceleration increase.
Again, really, really, really like didactic on the head, and then you see the film. And now if you scroll through near to the end of the film to after the credit, yeah, keep going further.
They will be mourned by a mother
Yeah,
earth.
bit further, bit further.
Looks up at the moon in the nights to come.
There you go,
Know
just
that
around
there
there.
is some corner of another world that is forever mankind. Good night.
So again, really, really explicit, really in your face. And then a little bit of information about how it works, what the technologies we used, and then the next slide after that tells people like how to protect themselves, check your sources. That'll do. We can take down take down that site. But so you can see how we think really, really carefully about where people are coming from, what they need to know, as well as trying to keep the kind of artistic integrity as well of it. And I'm just in the process of kind of building another deepfake project at the moment, which is more interactive and interacts with audience members and deepfakes them along the way. And again, thinking really carefully around consent, how much they need to know before you do the reveal of what's happening. And I just guess I can't emphasize enough how thinking through all of that really, really carefully and asking for a lot of advice and trying to figure out who's doing best practice in this is really important while building these projects.
How just in terms, I mean, that's super interesting, the YouTube framing versus the projects on the web page, because obviously you've got a totally different context around it, and you don't know where people are finding the video, might be embedded on Facebook or wherever, right? So there's no context. In terms of actually just trying to figure out best practice, and I know obviously a lot of this stuff is evolving as the technology evolves. I mean, how have you done that research? Where do you mentioned Witness? Are there other organizations or places that you go to kind of try and figure out, how best to think about these issues as you develop this new project?
There are actually, there is a resource that was sent to me that's just been built recently that talks about good use of synthetic media and AI for artists, as well as those who are commissioning. And let me dig that out, and I'll share it with you so that you can share it with the group. They are, again, another thing that is difficult about fast moving media is that as you are trying to figure out the ethics of this, the technology is moving at such a fast speed. So I can't tell you the number of ethics and virtual reality panels I was on over the years, which was talking about, you know, what kind of edits are okay and what's not, and filling in what, or directing people to do. And it's really, really super important, but it's really hard for all of this to be codified and put down in place as fast as the technology is going. So personally, I do a mixture of kind of consulting and asking and Googling, and it's not all solidly in one place, as far as I know. And as someone who's been kind of working in this area now for kind of 4 years, it can be quite hard, because again, we're literally thinking through this at the moment with an even more controversial and thorny project that we're in the process of. So we're literally asking ourselves, okay, where is best practice on this at the moment? And I don't think it is all in one place. Kind of good research skills, I think, is what is what I would recommend around this at the moment.
Yeah, because I think for a lot of the artists we've worked with on the New Dimensions Lab, because they are working on documentary projects, because they are dealing with nonfiction, trying to sort of figure out how to engage with this field in a responsible way it's really difficult. And I think the creative opportunities are huge, right? If you can manipulate video and you can manipulate audio, it's really exciting as an artist. But then the possibilities for misinformation and disinformation, and I think in my career, because it's straddled both journalism and documentary, also just the kind of general erosion of trust is a huge issue. So yeah, I don't know. Beyond the contextual way that you build your projects, how do you feel about things like watermarking? And do you think these things are necessary, or do you think it's all about context?
It really depends on the project. So I think that, we did get a lot of advice about watermarking specifically with this project, and the advice we got was that it wasn't necessary. I think partly because it's 50-year-old story that's obviously not real, and we were really explicit in the framing of it as well. We were told that was probably sufficient for it. I think if it had been something that was more newsy and more viral and could just be clipped out of context, it would be way more important to brand all over it that it wasn't real. So I think that, I guess that's what I mean about really thinking through the elements of every single project is so important, because I think that we've seen a deep fake of the Queen dancing on the Christmas message, which was another deep fake that came out a couple of years later, again was so silly that no one was really going to think that it was real. Whereas I think it was Extinction Rebellion did a deep fake of, I think it was the Belgian Prime Minister, like changing her policy around environmental practices, which that for me feels like way more like it needs to be watermarked, something that really could be potentially used to manipulate audiences. And so yeah, I think it's about the kind of potential plausibility, the potential for it to be really used to manipulate. I think the other thing that is really important is transparency. So making sure that in your materials, whether it's in the film itself or in the materials around it, it's really clear what technology you've used for which bits, so that your whole, ideally, if you can show your whole process somehow, I think that is really helpful. There are tools that are coming out which include data that is built into some of those tools for manipulation, which I think are really helpful, where you can look and see within the metadata what the editing process has been, what the AI tools that have been used to generate images or to manipulate them. And so I'm a big fan of these transparency tools as well that can be used. But if it's not in the metadata, and probably, to be honest, as well as being in the metadata, you should probably give some kind of write-up or put in your credits or put in the intro what those tools are that you're using.
Yeah, that's really interesting, the transparency tools. And I think, you know, I mean, as someone who has embraced creative documentary and creative nonfiction, and that we, you know, we absolutely encourage our artists to do that too. You know, there's always been these sort of, I feel like there's always been like these sort of movable lines between things around like reenactments and you know, and obviously just the way you
Yeah.
edit in documentary. I mean, it's never been straightforward. It just feels, I guess, with these new tools that there are new ways of both creating fictions in a good way and then manipulating fiction in a creating new fictions and then manipulating nonfiction. And yeah, it's something that I think we'll all have to just wrestle with as we go forward in this. But I mean, I think the Anthony Bourdain documentary example was an interesting one where,
Yeah.
you know, I think some documentary filmmakers would say that that was completely legitimate and within the realm of what documentary filmmakers manipulate anyway. But, you know, to others, you know, having Anthony Bourdain say something that he never actually said with his voice felt like a real betrayal of your audience and of the truth. I don't know how you
Yeah.
feel about that, or
Well, I think there are kind of the ethics of using the data, like the ethics of just using the data, whether it's transparent or not. And then there's the ethics of how much your audience understand what you're doing or the possibilities of what you're doing. So, you know, I think that 20, 30 years ago, we had to spell out different techniques than we have to now. Now, you know, now people know that Photoshop works and how it works, and everyone's using filters on their phone and you don't think when you see an image or when you see video, you understand editing techniques. Our literacy of AI generated content or edited content is not the same. I mean, it's hugely changed in the last year in terms of still images and text, but that's not the case in video or in audio yet. And even then, I'd say still, even though you might see stuff in you might see stuff in the media, I still think there's a real difference between a public kind of recognition that the text they might be coming across online might be written by AI, and like there's one thing of just like knowing, and another thing of it becoming so ingrained in popular usage that you assume that there have been these kind of techniques using. And so I feel like part of what that messaging needs to be is where society is at the moment with those tools, and making those messages appropriate to what kind of collective understanding is, or a kind of medium understanding is in society at that time. Then I think there are different ethical issues around kind of consent of your imagery. So as you will know, in countries all around the world, there have been people very concerned in the performing arts around their visual likeness and their voice being used without their permission. And at the moment, there aren't good legal rights. It's getting more and more so in the EU, but certainly not in the UK, not good protections against people having their likeliness, whether in voice or image, being replicated. And that's also the case if someone's dead. Like, what are the rights of your voice or of your image if you no longer exist? And so again, that's not codified at the moment as to what's okay and what's not okay. And I think it's something again that we discussed at length about with Nixon, and we ended up going to the Nixon Library and telling them about our project before we went ahead. And you know, that also we had huge debates around, well, this is, you know, yes, we're putting up words into Nixon's mouth, but these are words that were written for him that would have been read. And so, you know, we're not making him say anything that was never not scripted for him to say. So we were, you know, it was a really complicated ethical decision about, is it okay to get someone to say something that they haven't given you permission to say? Even if they have given you permission at a certain stage, this is again, I've been talking to Equity, the trade union in the UK, who deal with performers' rights. They're saying, well, people sign away their rights for their image and their voice at the moment because they don't really understand even what it is. You go in to do an audition,
Right.
you're asked to sign a bit of paper, and then, you know, you're giving away your rights for someone to then clone you. Like, people are, you know, it's not a fair position to be put in when there isn't actually enough literacy or context for them to be making these decisions. So it's really tangled and complicated.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think in America with the actors' strike, with the SAG-AFTRA folks, you know, it's also been obviously a huge issue because it's already happened. And there's a lot of contracts where they're trying to get people to sign a contract that for, you know, one day's work, they'll record you and then, you know, they'll make the film without you.
Yeah.
You know, it's already an issue that I think you're right, around the literacy, the literacy element of it. I guess the thing that's quite scary at the moment is just how fast things are moving, and it feels like it's really difficult to stay up to date, even if you're
is.
paying attention, right? And
Yeah.
most people aren't. But even if you are looking at the stuff, like, I mean, I feel like I look at this all day long, every day, and I have no idea what's going on half the time, right? Because it's just like, everything's changing. And I think, you know, I think one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, and I thought it would be so interesting to hear about an event of moon disaster, is that I do think that is actually where artists do play a really interesting role in unpacking some of this, but not in a totally didactic way, you know, because if you read about this in an article in the newspaper, it hits differently than if it comes through a piece where you experience this, right? It's a really different relationship with what this means, with the meaning of all of this for us. So I'm glad to hear you're making a new piece. I can't wait. When will it be?
Hopefully in
What's
March.
the
Hopefully in
timeline?
March we'll have a prototype. It won't be totally finished, but we'll have a prototype then. So that's the timeline. Yeah.
I just wanted to mention, if anyone wants to ask a question, Sorreletta, they can type them out, right? And then you can read them. Yeah. So if anyone has any questions, just put them in the question chat, and then Sorreletta will read them out. I don't want to hog the conversation because we are going to have to wrap in 12 minutes. So yeah, I'm just thinking in terms of, I mean, maybe this is a complicated question, but in terms of your relationship with XR specifically, you know, one of the issues we are kind of dealing with at the moment is a lot of stuff around access and headsets. And I think that, you know, from the last lab we had, there's still so much excitement and interest and potential around what the medium of XR can, like, specifically talking about VR, actually. Let's just narrow it down to VR. There's so much excitement around what VR can do, the affordances of VR that no other medium right now can do. And yet we keep butting up against this headset issue and this access issue and this one of the time. And I'm just wondering, as someone, sorry, I'm switching gears a little bit, but I think it's relevant because we're sort of, you know, it's all overlapping. How are you thinking about that now? I mean, I know in your new role, you've got like a much broader remit. It's a little, you know, it's storytelling, I guess, across the board, but how do you feel about XR VR as it currently stands, and looking back with a bit of a long view?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, I'm really excited by what's been created. I think the last piece I made was in 2018, so 5 years ago, and just the storytelling has got so brilliant. It's really exciting to see what the form is turning into. I think very specifically on the distribution, I don't think my opinion on that has changed at all since leaving The Guardian, which is, I kind of came up with a pyramid kind of idea of distribution when I was at The Guardian, and that was to try and build pieces that had different layers of accessibility, because the kind of all singing dancing version is so alluring because of the possibilities of it, and I don't think it should be disregarded because it's so inaccessible. It's, you know, it's amazing to be playing with that technology and making use of its affordances, but I do think that there are ways of scaling it down, the same piece this is. And so, you know, something like 6x9, which we brought to Tribeca with you, was great because we built this big set, which was really fun, and we had people who were involved in actually making the piece there, who could talk to the audiences. That's the kind of, you know, that was the version that's very, very hard for only a few people to see. Then we had a version that went out with Google Cardboard. We sent out Google Cardboard and we had it on your phone. We then did do a 360 version of it, which needed to be recut because honestly, just watching a kind of a cell to watch on a screen is really quite boring. So we had to recut that entirely. But then we also broke it down into podcasts because we had loads of audio interviews that we did. We broke it down into Instagram stories. And then I kind of commissioned a whole load of writing around it as well. We did photo galleries. Now we have the resources of The Guardian to be doing all of that. But I guess what I'm saying is that you can do stuff that is, that you can do versioning, and not every story can translate into every single different format. And you do have to kind of struggle and play around with that a bit. But I now use this kind of pyramid model. So for an event, a moon disaster, at the top of the pyramid is a 1960s sitting room where we asked people to reconstruct a whole watch room party. Then a version below that is like a cinema screening. We've got a full cinema screening. Then below that, we've probably got our interactive website. Below that, there's probably our YouTube video. And then below that, we've just got kind of clips. And we've also built out other components as well. We've got like a university undergraduate module that we've got. We've got, you know, the collaboration that we did with Scientific American around the documentary, again, that uses clips. And so I'm really thinking about different entry points for different audiences, what's going to be most useful for them, and how I can use this story to help support. And I think the other thing that I'm thinking about more and more while being in the Storytelling Institute is how can your piece be supporting other elements as well. So for instance, 6x9, I had a LinkedIn message a few months ago by one of the people whose voices I used in that piece saying, we're still using this piece to be campaigning for solitary confinement around the US. It's not on Oculus anymore. Please, can you fix it? Because it's one of our main campaigning elements. And I just thought, this is great that this piece, it's not just a piece for me as an artist, great, my piece goes around the world. It's like, it's actually supporting an infrastructure of like different elements that are being helped, that are trying to build a case towards outlawing solitary confinement in the US. And so I guess one of the things that I'm trying to do more and more is if we can engage with those people who are working in your ecosystem, if you're trying to build a piece that's trying to have some kind of impact in the world, if you can be working in collaboration with them, you can be thinking about how you can be reversioning or using your piece or sending just taking one headset and giving it to them. Like Johnny, who I was talking to, he said, we've got one headset that we take around and we put it on policymakers' heads and they see 6x9. Like, it's really important to us. I'm like, okay, this is not about mass distribution. It's about one headset and getting it to the key people. And that's really, really important as well. So I guess I'm trying to think about how my story can get to different people to be of use in different ways.
I think that's really great. And I think that example of like the one headset having a huge impact really resonates, because we've heard stories like that. And I think it's really easy, you know, in especially because the technology space is so often about scale. Does it scale? Can it scale? You know, how many? We kind of forget that actually sometimes it really is in those kind of one-on-one situations where you know your piece is actually really having an effect. And I love your pyramid model. I always used to use the pyramid model for distribution in film, you know, like
Mm,
you can go to the top tier festival and then all the
mhm,
others, you can go down the pyramid, but you can't go back up.
mhm,
But I think this idea of, you know, how you think about your project in a pyramid space where it's not just the installation, which I think people can get really hung up on because they
mhm.
think Venice, they think Sundance,
Yeah,
you know, but that's not a, I mean, that's a wonderful opportunity, but it's not a business model. And it's
no,
not really an audience engagement model either.
no.
Um, so I think that's a really, really great model. So Letta, I'm just gonna keep asking questions unless you interrupt. So if there are any questions, will you just let me know? Okay, cool. Thank you. Um, oh, I have so many other questions. I'm just trying to think what the yeah, I guess maybe I'll just to bring it specifically to this continent, to Africa. Uh, you know, in terms of the work, the work that you see needs to happen now, and I'm thinking more broadly in storytelling.
Mm.
Um, what are you thinking of as sort of models that are working? I mean, I'm just thinking about, you know, the what you're doing with the Storytelling Institute. Are there models that you are seeing that work well to sort of push this kind of storytelling further? Are there institutes or funding models? Like, what do you kind of think needs to happen to kind of keep pushing this field? Because it feels like, and you know, by this field, I mean all of us exploring multiple forms of storytelling beyond the traditional film. It feels a little bit like post-pandemic, you know, there's a bit of a funding
Yeah.
crisis globally. I don't think it's just here. Um, and so it's yeah, it sort of feels like at a time where we need these stories more than ever. It's getting harder actually to fund them and make them.
Mm.
Are there kind of models that you see that work? Are there things that you think are useful in terms of us kind of supporting this work going forward?
On a purely kind of financial basis, on the kind of how do we just fund these works to happen? It's really hard, and I think it's like there is not a lot of money out there at the moment. I think the tactic that I see people taking, and I'm using at the moment with this next piece, is to really try and build very basic versions upwards, because I'm finding it very hard to get the big grants that maybe 5-10 years ago there seemed to be more money for. If we can build like proofs of concepts, if we can kind of build things up, I just see that as being, it's a very pragmatic answer, but I honestly see this as being the best, at least the most possible way of getting work to happen at the moment. So tiny grants, working with people that have got the skill sets and the collaborations that feel really tangible at the moment. Because I think that I've had a few pieces that have got really stuck, particularly at the moment where they've had enormous budgets and ambition, and it's been really hard to get them off the ground, really, really hard. And so, I think in new media all the time we say build prototypes, we want to like test and do things in phase and iterate, but so often we don't, because we're just like, we want to build this massive, really brilliant thing. It's really hard to do that at the moment. So trying to build really little things and build them up is my best bit of advice. And then I think with AI and particularly in the global south, I think trying to find technologists who are really thinking about responsible data sets, and also creating also an XR, like who is trying to do good work in building the technology right at the moment and trying to support using those data sets and those bits of technology, because this is something that everyone will have said in your series, but like there is huge bias and problems that are built into the big commercial data sets. And the more that we can be using the smaller data sets that are more representative and that are being built with artists and with kind of civil society to be getting more representative outputs, I think. And it's the same with, to be honest, it's also the same with the headsets, like just trying to make sure that we are supporting the right technologists along the way, and that they're in collaboration with us means that we're going to get better technology. So that's something I'm thinking about at the moment, is who's doing the work in that space and how we can be collaborating.
Yeah, I think that sounds really hopeful actually. And the good news is there are companies in South Africa and actually across Africa who are doing really, really interesting responsible AI work, like this the Lapa AI in Joburg, and really kind of exploring AI from a very African perspective. So it is happening. I think what's interesting is like I don't think in any of these spaces artists are involved very often here, or indeed, I mean, in a lot of spaces I know, but I mean, I think that is definitely an issue I'm seeing on the continent here, is that just artists are often not in those conversations, and that's something we're trying to change at Electric South. And with that, I think we are out of time, but Fran, I know you're really busy. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been so great to hear from you, and I think this focus on synthetic media adds a really interesting element to the conversations we've had before with some of our other speakers. And it's definitely I'm sure our artists will agree, like just for all of us thinking about media and nonfiction and how to create work that is meaningful and responsible. I think this is a really important conversation to have and to keep having, because as we know, this conversation is ever evolving and evolving fast. But thank you for joining us, and hopefully we can bring you over to South Africa for a lab one day.
We'd love that. We'd love that. It's lovely to see you, Ingrid. And yeah, thank you everyone for watching.
Thanks,
you so
everyone.
much. Thank you everyone for coming in.
Bye.